Okay, Chapter 2. There were three things that Sabrina took great pride in. One, she had successfully arm wrestled every boy at the orphanage, including two extremely humiliated janitors. Two, she wasn't afraid of heights. And three, she wasn't a sissy. But when one wakes up to find a giant hairy spider crawling on one's face, one should be allowed to throw a hissy fit, which was exactly what Sabrina did. Her blood-curdling scream caused Delphine to wake up, see the spider, and scream too. Delphine's scream just made the whole thing that much more horrible for Sabrina, so she screamed even louder, which caused the little girl to scream at her sister's scream, resulting in a mini concert of hysteria that went on and on for about 5 minutes. Granny burst into their bedroom with Elvis at her side. Granny's gray hair, still streaked with its former red, was rolled up in huge curlers and tucked underneath a sleeping cap. She wore a bright blue nightgown patterned with little cows jumping over little moons, and her face was covered in a mossy green mud mask that she swore kept her looking young. But her mud mask wasn't nearly as startling as the deadly, sharp broadsword she held in her hand, and the fierce battle cry that bellowed from her throat. Scanning the room for attackers, the old woman said, "My goodness, what is the matter?" "That," Sabrina and Delphine shouted in unison, pointing at the black tarantula the size of a baked potato that had leapt off the bed and was now clinging to the nearby curtain. Its 8 long, hairy legs and vicious-looking pincers clicked and snapped as it climbed up the drapes. "Oh, children, it's just a spider," Granny said, as she crossed the room and picked the creepy-crawly thing up with her bare hand. Delphine squealed as if she had been the one to touch it and crawled under her blanket to hide. "Just a spider?" Sabrina cried. "You could put a saddle on that thing." "He's South American, I believe," Granny said, petting the spider like it was a kitten. "You're a long way from home, friend. How did you find your way here?" "Like you have to ask," Sabrina cried. Now," the old woman said, "it's just a harmless spider." Elvis trotted over and sniffed the creature. The tarantula raised up 2 legs and hissed at the Great Dane, causing the usually fearless hound to leap back and yelp in surprise. "Is it gone yet, Delphine?" Muffled voice came from under the covers. "Has it been squished?" "Girls, Pluck's just being a boy. Brothers do these kinds of things to their sisters all the time," Granny said. "He's not our brother," Sabrina shouted as she crawled out of her bed and stomped across the room towards the door. "Where are you going?" Granny asked. "To tell Puck's face what my fist thinks of him," the girl said, marching past the old woman and out the door. "Don't leave me in here with the spider," Delphine begged, but her sister ignored her plea. Pluck was long overdue for a sock in the nose, and Sabrina was just the person to give it to him. Puck, like Mr. Canis, was an ever-after, a 4,000-year-old fairy in the body of an 11-year-old boy. Rude, selfish, smelly, and obnoxious, the boy had been taunting Sabrina since he had met her. He dumped a bucket of paint on her, rubbed her toothbrush with red pepper seeds, filled her pockets with bloodworms, and put something in her shoes that still made her shudder when she recalled its smell. Puck also had a slew of magical pranks. He could shape-shift into any animal and several inanimate objects. Sabrina couldn't count how many times he had morphed into a chair and then pulled himself out from under her as she sat down. Why Granny had taken to him was beyond comprehension, especially with his well-documented history. Everyone from William Shakespeare to Kipling had warned about Pluck's exploits, yet Granny treated him as if he was one of the family and had even invited him to live with the Grimms. Now Sabrina was determined to make the trickster king wish he had declined the invitation. She marched down the hall to his bedroom. No one had been in Puck's room since it had been built. Galinda, the good witch, and the three little pigs used nails, hammers, and magic to create it, and when it was finished, the rude boy hadn't bothered to invite anyone in to see the final results. So when Sabrina opened the door and stepped inside, she was amazed by what she found. Puck's room was impossible. There were trees and grass, and a stone path, and a waterfall that spilled into a lagoon. There was an actual sky with clouds and kites where the ceiling should have been. In the center of the clearing was a wrestling ring in which a kangaroo wearing boxing gloves and shorts sat lazily waiting his next challenger. A roller coaster sailed on a track above. Sabrina and an ice cream truck sat off to one side. In the center of it all was Puck, perched on an enormous throne wearing a stupid golden crown. He was eating an ice cream cone that held half a dozen different flavors scoops, all of which were dripping on his arm. Poor Sabrina was so astonished by her surroundings that she failed to notice the metal plate at her feet. When she stepped onto it, she triggered the release of an egg, which rolled down a narrow track and fell onto a rusty nail that cracked its shell in half. The egg then emptied its drippings into a skillet, which triggered the striking of a match that ignited a gas burner. Soon, the egg was popping and crackling as the heat from the flame cooked it, causing steam to rise, which in turn filled a balloon that rose into the air. The balloon was connected by a string to a small lever that tipped a bucket of water into a drinking glass sitting on the high end of a seesaw. The seesaw tilted downward from the weight, untying a rope that held a heavy sandbag. The sandbag fell to the ground and hit a big red button, and then it all came to a stop. And unfortunately, that's when Sabrina noticed the bizarre contraption. "What the?" she said aloud, but just then a buzzer drowned out her voice, and the girl was catapulted off the metal plate, up through the air, and then down, into a large vat of goo, causing an enormous splash. "Doesn't anyone knock around here?" Puck complained, when Sabrina finally fought her way to the surface. "What is this stuff?" she cried, as she struggled through the vat of thick white mush, in which several dark chunks floated. The stink of it nearly made Sabrina barf. "It's a big tub of glue and buttermilk, of course," the boy said, as if it was obvious, "with some bread and butter pickles added for flavor. It's quite stinky." "You're going to pay for this, Puck," Sabrina screamed as she climbed out of the tub. She wiped her face as well as she could and flared her nostrils. "There she is, Miss America," the prankster sang. He tossed his huge ice cream cone into the wrestling ring, and the boxing kangaroo lapped it up happily. Then the boy jumped into the air, and two massive pink-streaked insect wings sprang from his back. Soon he was soaring high above Sabrina. "Just like an ever after to use magic to run from a fight. Come down here, you smelly little freak," Sabrina shouted. "With our fists?" he cried indignantly. "Human. I'm royalty. A prince fights like a prince." His wings flapped loudly as he flew across the forest room to a nearby table. He scooped up two swords, and flew back to Sabrina, tossing one at her feet as he floated effortlessly to the ground. The girl grabbed her weapon and held it confidently. It was made of wood, like Puck's, but would still hurt if she got a good whack at him. The two children circled each other. Sabrina wasted no time thrusting her sword at the boy, who immediately floated several feet off the ground and spun easily, dodging her attack. While she was off balance, Puck flew towards her, trying to strike her arm, but Sabrina shifted her weight, swung her sword, and hit him on the top of the head. "Dirty little snot-face," the boy cried as he rubbed his sore noggin. "Someone's been learning." "Charge me again and you'll see what else I've learned, horse breath," Sabrina threatened. Puck flew at her, swinging his wooden sword towards her shoulder, only to have it blocked by Sabrina's sword. She took a swipe at his belly, missed him by less than an inch. "Tisk, tisk. Looks like you haven't learned the most important lesson of all," he laughed. "Always protect your butt." Puck spun around and smacked Sabrina on the backside with his sword. The blow felt like the sting of a dozen honeybees, but Sabrina would never give him the satisfaction of hearing her cry out in pain. "You're as slow as you are ugly," the boy taunted. "You miserable little stink pig," Sabrina screamed, wildly slashing at him. He easily dodged each attack, leaping and flying out of the way, even flipping over her head. When he landed, he jammed his sword into her back and chuckled. "Too bad, you're dead," he said. "You've got to get a hold of the temper. It beats you every time." Sabrina tossed her sword down angrily and spun on him with her fist clenched. Seeing that she meant to knock his head off, Puck did what anybody would do when facing an angry Sabrina Grimm. He ran. She chased him around the lagoon, through some heavy brush and out the other side and right into Granny. The old woman stood over them, and her expression, or what you could see of it behind her beauty mask, was disapproving. The mask seemed to make a big impression on Puck. "Old lady," he cried. He always called Granny by that name. "Your face! You've been cursed by a hobgoblin." "That's enough of this nonsense," Granny says as the dirty boy scampered to his feet and hid behind her. "First of all, in my defense, the chainsaw was propped on the door and was only supposed to scare her. And if someone got hurt, it wasn't my fault." "Puck, we're talking about the spider," Granny said. "Oh, the spider. How did it go off? Were they scared out of their wits? Which one of them wet the bed?" "I know you didn't mean any harm," said the old lady, "but the girls do have school today, and it would have been nice to have a quiet, chaos-free morning for once." "And what would be the fun in that?" Puck said. "Let's back up," Sabrina demanded. "What chainsaw?" Granny ignored her question and took the boy's hand. She placed the tarantula in it and smiled kindly. "Let's put this somewhere safe." Puck took the spider and rubbed its furry back softly. "It's okay, little guy. Did the big ugly girl scare you? I know she's gruesome, but you're safe now." Sabrina growled. "What's going on in here?" Dolphine said from the doorway. The little girl rubbed the sleep out of her eyes and then looked around. "Holy cow!" "Dolphine, move off the plate you're standing on," her sister warned, but the little girl just gawked at Puck's room. "You got an ice cream truck?" she cried as the roller coaster whipped along its track above her. "And a roller coaster?" "Dolphine, listen to me," Sabrina shouted, but the egg was already cooking. The balloon was already floating upwards. "Sabrina, why do you look like a booger?" the little girl asked as the seesaw fell. The alarm sounded, and just as it had done for Sabrina, the catapult fired Dolphine into the air and sent her flailing into the vat of goo. When she landed, she struggled to stand up and wipe the slime from her face. "What is this?" she asked. "Glue and buttermilk," Puck shouted. "And bread and butter pickles," Sabrina added, picking a squishy slice of pickle from behind her ear and tossing it to the ground. Delphine's face curled up in confusion, as if she couldn't get her brain around the idea. Then a huge smile came on her face. "I want to do it again," she laughed. Granny helped Delphine out of the sticky goop. "Look at us," Sabrina said. "We can't go to school today." Suddenly, her anger at Puck faded. "We can't go to school today. I can do more research," she thought. "No, you've already been out for 3 weeks. I don't want you to get too far behind," Granny said, eyeing the girls and fighting a smile that eventually won the battle. "We'll just go tomorrow then," Sabrina suggested. Before Granny could respond, Mr. Canis appeared at the door, fully dressed in an oversized suit. He looked exhausted and feverish, even more frail than before his transformation, which was startling. He looked like he could use another 3 weeks in bed. "The children have a guest," he said, leaning unsteadily on the door frame. "Thank you, Mr. Canis," Granny said, sounding quite motherly. "You go and get your rest." The old man nodded and shuffled back towards his room. "Who's here to see you?" Puck said enviously. Sabrina shrugged and turned to follow Granny downstairs, with Delphine and Puck following eagerly. As the family entered the living room, they spotted a skinny old woman in a drab business suit standing by a bookshelf. She picked up a book with her bony hands, scrutinized the title. Sabrina knew the book. It was called Mermaids Are People Too. The skinny old woman tossed it aside and turned to face them, and before Sabrina saw the woman's face, she knew who it was. "Good morning, girls," Miss Schmert said. "Did you miss me?" Chapter 3. Minerva Schmert hadn't changed since the last time the girls had seen her. The caseworker was still ugly and tired-looking. Her bones still poked out of her clothes as if they were trying to escape her body, and she still had the same angry scowl on her face that she'd had when she left them at the train platform 3 weeks ago. She gazed over her long hooked nose and studied the family scornfully. Puck cringed when his eyes swept over her. My, she said disapprovingly. "Miss Schmert." "What a pleasure," Granny said, without much conviction. "It's so nice to see you again." "Girls, get your things," Miss Schmert said, staring at the old woman's eyes. "You're going back to the orphanage." Delphine slipped her hand into her sister's and squeezed so hard it hurt. "What in heaven for?" Granny said. "Because, Miss Grimm, you've been completely negligent," the caseworker barked. "What does negligent mean?" Delphine said. "It means she's a failure," Miss Schmert said, interrupting Sabrina, who usually answered Delphine's vocabulary questions. "It means she refused to do what the state requires of her. It means she's unfit." "You two haven't had a day of school since you arrived," the caseworker continued. "I sent your grandmother a letter reminding her about the law, but I never heard back. So I sent another, and then another, and then another. But still, I heard nothing. So because your granny can't find the time to put pen to paper and assure me that you two will be educated, I had to get on a 5 a.m. train and sit next to a man who sniffed his own armpits over and over again for 2 hours. Imagine how thrilled I am to find out that not only have you two not been going to school for a month, but you obviously haven't seen a bathtub or a bar of soap either." "Who is this woman?" Puck asked. "Her name is Minerva Schmert. She's our caseworker from the orphanage, Sabrina said. Cranky old buzzard, isn't she? The boy replied. Sabrina smiled. Puck sure has his moments, she thought. And who are you supposed to be? Miss Schmertz said, turning her angry face at the boy. The king of snot-nosed delinquents? Puck smiled. Finally, someone who's heard of me. This is my nephew, visiting from Akron, Ohio, Granny said, as she snatched Puck's crown off his head. Miss Schmertz, I assure you the girls were going to go to school today. We've gotten a little sidetracked with visiting and such. The truth was, Sabrina and Delphine had made every excuse to avoid school. After the family had foiled a plot by Jack of the Beanstalk story to release giants into the world so he could kill them and regain his fame, the girls convinced their grandmother they needed some time to recover. Then Sabrina had come down with a mysterious stomach flu that Delphine conveniently got the next week. A series of stubbed toes, allergic reactions, dizzy spells, bronchial attacks, and food poisoning had combined to keep them out of the classroom, giving them time to do what they both thought was more important: research. Granny's immense and disorganized library of books on all things magical probably held the key to finding and rescuing the girls' parents, missing now for almost 2 years. The Sisters Grimm were in agreement for once. School could wait until Henry and Veronica Grimm were home. You understand, Miss Schmertz, Granny continued. After all, I haven't seen Sabrina since she was a week old. And now you aren't going to see her again until she's 18, the caseworker said. She grabbed the sisters roughly and pulled them towards the door. Girls, we've got a train to catch. We'll send for your things. Just then, Elvis trotted in the room. He spotted Miss Schmertz, and his usual happy face instantly turned ferocious. He charged the caseworker, sending her tumbling backwards over a pile of books, and then stood over her, baring his teeth and growling. Get this thing away from me, or we'll be making a stop at the pound, too, Miss Schmertz shouted, waving a book at the dog in a fruitless attempt to intimidate him. Granny stepped forward to help the woman, but Sabrina and Delphine stopped her. Instead, the girl stood on either side of the dog and looked down at her. Call him off, she demanded. Not until you understand what's going to happen today, Sabrina said. My sister and I are going upstairs and get cleaned up. We're going to get dressed, and then you're going to take us to school. Then you're going back to New York alone. You don't make the rules, young lady, Miss Schmertz snapped. Then we'll just let you and Elvis work out your problems on your own. Delphine patted the big dog on the head. I guess you could probably make a run for it, but you won't get far. Elvis can smell evil. Elvis barked viciously. Miss Schmertz stared at the girls for a long moment and then furrowed her brow. Bleh. Go get ready for school, she snarled. Despite her delay tactics, Sabrina was actually looking forward to her first day of 6th grade. School offered her something that Granny's house didn't: normal people. She would be surrounded by dull teachers and glassy-eyed kids, watching the clock tick slowly, and she would be as happy as a pig in mud. When you lived with a flying boy and the big bad wolf, a little boredom was welcome. Sabrina had even planned how her first day would go. She would melt into the crowd and do her best not to draw any attention to herself. She wouldn't join any clubs or raise her hand, but she would drift through the day like an invisible girl. She would find some kids to befriend, and they would sit together at lunchtime and maybe pass notes in class, just like normal kids. It was going to be one long, dull, happy experience. Unfortunately, Schmertz was ruining Sabrina's plans. It's hard to be just another face in the crowd when you're being dragged down the hallway by your ear. Not that it was entirely Schmert's fault that Sabrina was getting attention. Even after 3 vigorous washings, the girl's hair was still full of goo from Puck's booby trap. It stuck out in 1,000 different directions like a hungry octopus. Delphine, on the other hand, had sculpted her hair into an old-fashioned beehive style that spiraled high on her head. Inside the sticky tower, the little girl had inserted several pencils and pens, a ruler, a protractor, 2 gummy erasers, and a package of peanut butter crackers for later. By the time the girls got to the principal's office, Sabrina was sure every kid in the school thought that Ferry Point Landing Elementary was now enrolling escaped mental patients. "Excuse me, I'm Minerva Schmert from the New York City Department of Child Welfare," Miss Schmert said, pounding impatiently on a bell that sat in the counter in the school office. 2 middle-aged secretaries were busy spraying bug spray at something in the far corner. The one with the thick glasses leaned down and smacked whatever it was with a magazine, while the chubby one stomped on it like an Irish folk dancer. "I think it's dead," the chubby one said as she bent over to get a better look. Schmert rang the bell again, and the 2 women looked at her as if she had just come in with a flamethrower. "I'm in a hurry," the caseworker said. "I need to enroll these 2 orphans." "We're not orphans," Sabrina and Delphine said. Miss Schmert pinched them each on the shoulder for arguing with her. The spectacled secretary crossed the room and snatched the bell away. Once she had tossed it into a drawer, she looked up at the caseworker and frowned. "I'll see if our guidance counselor, Mr. Sheepshake, is available," she said as she eyed the children in bewilderment. Shaking her head, she stepped over to a door and knocked on it lightly. "Sir, we have some new students, I think," the secretary said, turning back and eyeing the girls' odd hairdos. Yes, please bring them in," the happy voice called. The secretary ushered the trio into the office and closed the door. Mr. Sheepshank was a little man dressed in a green suit and a bow tie with smiley faces on it. He had a round, full, friendly face with freckles as red as his hair. When he smiled, little wrinkle lines formed in the corner of his glittering mouth. "Good morning, ladies. I'm Casper Sheepshank, your school counselor. Welcome to Freeport Landing Elementary." Mr. Sheepshank took Miss Schmert's hand in his and shook it vigorously. The caseworker blushed, and she did something Sabrina had never seen before. She smiled. "I'm Minerva Schmert from New York City's Department of Child Welfare," she said. "It's a pleasure to meet you," the guidance counselor replied. "And who are these lovely ladies?" "Introduce yourself, girls," Miss Schmert said, giggling. "I'm Sabrina Grimm," Sabrina said. Sheepshanks seized her hand and gave her the same joint-jarring treatment she had given to Miss Schmert. "I'm Delphina Grimm." Delphine chirped. "Grimm, you wouldn't happen to be related to Henry Grimm?" Counselor said. "He's our dad," Sabrina said. "He went to school here with us too," Mr. Sheepshank said. "I remember him quite clearly. He was always getting into trouble. I assume I can expect more of the same from the 2 of you." Unsure how to respond, the girl said nothing. After a long, uncomfortable pause, Sheepshank chuckled and winked at Sabrina. "It's a joke, lady. Your father was a model student."